This is a tutorial about how to set up a Raspberry Pi in many different environments. To start, we're going to need to gather some parts. This is a soft list of what items you'll need to set up a Raspberry Pi, but depending on the situation, you may need different components. Of course, we need the Raspberry Pi. We need an SD card that needs to be either a class 10 or better, a UHS class 1 or better, or a video class V10 or better. We will need a 5-volt 2 amp power brick or better. The more amps, the better. Sometimes they are labeled as 2 amps, and in other cases they're measured in milliamps, so you need 2000 milliamps or better. You will need a USB mouse or keyboard. The mouse can also be Bluetooth once we set it up, and potentially you can also use a Bluetooth keyboard, but sometimes the low-level system doesn't know how to handle wireless keyboards, so just be careful of that. We'll need a monitor. You can use one of the following. With all the Raspberry Pi models, you can use an HDMI monitor. With the Pi 1, you can use an RCA monitor on the yellow jack that's on the top of the Raspberry Pi. On the Pi 2 and the Pi 3, though, you need a converter cable, which uses a tip ring sleeve connector that goes into the audio jack and gives out the video connector. You can find those kind of cables online if you look around a little bit. Also, if you're setting up the Raspberry Pi for the first time, you'll need internet connection. To do that, you can use either an Ethernet cable, or with the Pi 1 or the Pi 2, you can use a USB Wi-Fi dongle, which needs to have Linux kernel support so that it actually works with the Raspberry Pi. Or if you have the Pi 3, you can also just use the built-in Wi-Fi. So now we're going to set up the SD card. We're going to create a new FAT32 partition. Sometimes you'll need to make a new MS-DOS partition table. If you're using Windows, you really don't have to worry about this. You just create a new FAT32 partition. You don't want to format as NTFS because that will not work. So here I'm just using gparted to format the partition so that it is ready to go. And then we're going to go and open the web browser next. So if you go to Google, you can type in BerryBoot, and then the first link there is the BerryBoot version 2 bootloader. You can use this on all versions of the Raspberry Pi. Make sure to select the correct board. You can use the link on the bottom for the Pi 2 and the Pi 3, and the link on the top there for the original Pi. The top link will work for all Pis, but it doesn't take advantage of the Pi 2 or the Pi 3's quad-core processor, so you'll notice it'll be very much slower. So now that that's downloaded, we're going to extract the folder, and we're going to copy all of the contents onto the SD card. Then we will eject the SD card. So first we're going to install the SD card. On the Pi 1 you should use a regular SD card and it will click. On the Pi 2 you push it in the micro SD card and it will click. The Pi 3 does not click when you plug in the SD card. Next we're going to plug in the HDMI cable into the video out port on the Raspberry Pi. I've already plugged this into my monitor. Next we're going to plug in the Ethernet cable. If you have a good crisp Ethernet cable, you'll hear a click when you plug it into the port correctly. After that, I'm going to plug the USB port of the Raspberry Pi into my USB hub. I'm using a powered USB hub here, but you can just as well not use a USB hub. My USB hub will also be providing power, so when I plug the USB cable in on the top of the Raspberry Pi into the USB hub, that is how I'll be using power. However, you can just as well plug in the power on the top of the Raspberry Pi into like a phone charger, for example, that provides 2 amps. And then once you have done this, plug in your mouse and keyboard into the USB ports on either your Raspberry Pi or if you have a USB hub, and then plug in the power into the wall outlet. And your Raspberry Pi will boot up as soon as you plug it into the wall. There will be no power on or off switch. When you want to turn off the Pi, you just make sure to save all your files, and then you turn it off by unplugging it from the wall. Now we're going to install the SD card into the Raspberry Pi, and then we're going to turn the Raspberry Pi on. You'll be greeted by this screen here, which you can see now. If you see a colored square in the upper right, or if you see a power icon, that means that the power you're giving it is not correct. So we're going to select the time zone. We're going to select the SD card, which is often called MMC BLK0. Just tell it to format the file system as ext4, and it's going to copy all the parts of the disk to the correct areas. This may take a minute, especially on larger SD cards. Now we're going to select the Debian Raspbian image, the official Raspberry image, and then I'm going to speed up the download part here because this takes a couple minutes. Depending on your internet speed, it may take anywhere from a couple seconds to I've seen it take as much as 2 hours on very bad connections, and you'll generally want a very stable connection to download this. Sometimes it'll pause a little bit, but just give it a minute and it'll resume itself. So now it's going to make sure that all of the files are written to the disk properly. You click OK, and the computer will reboot itself into the new image. So you'll be faced with a bootloader, and it'll automatically start to decide to count down. You can just click boot and it'll go much faster, but if you want to have other operating systems, you can also just have them in that menu. And now the Raspbian image will begin to boot up. First it does a file system check, and then after that it starts up all the other parts of the subsystem. There's going to be an error where it can't resize the partition, but that's okay. That doesn't really matter, especially when you're using this particular bootloader. It just will not happen, but it's already taken care of it beforehand, so that is perfectly fine. And now we will see our brand new desktop. The applications menu is up on the upper right, and that will get you going.